We're starting with Meet the Founders, Innovating a Tough Environment. And it's my pleasure to introduce the moderator, Stephanie Flanders. She's the economics editor at the BBC. She was the economic editor at Newsnight. She's been a reporter for the New York Times. And I could go on and on and on. So, Stephanie, please make her feel welcome.
I think even if you had gone on and on, you would have noticed that my resume has very little e-commerce, very little internet in it. So I'm hoping to take the journalistic advantage of this occasion to be, I'm pretty confident, more ignorant than anybody in this room when it comes to some of these issues and ask stupid questions. But I hope you'll forgive me when I say really asinine things which show that I don't know anything at all. But as I say, I hope I can take an advantage from that. And I think if we're talking about innovating in a downturn, how do you run a successful e-commerce company in a downturn, it is interesting to me. I noticed it, I was saying earlier to these guys, I noticed it in Davos that, in a week where I had a few days with people who were practically slashing their wrists, senior business leaders and policymakers slashing their wrists over the latest Asian export numbers and the future shape of the global economy, and we were all going to hell in a handcart. You would then have dinner with serious internet people, and you wouldn't know that a crisis was happening. They were just bright and breezy, carrying on as normal. And I was trying to decide from that, was it that they just live in California and there's nicer weather there and they're just feeling, they're always a bit more kind of optimistic? Or do they just breathe a different air in this sector relative to the traditional sector? Or, are there things to be learnt from my perspective, but also maybe all of yours, about how internet companies, and particularly e-commerce, have dealt with the last year? And then, of course, we've got a fantastic panel to talk about that. The equivalent of, they work at the equivalent of the coal face of the economy these days in terms of e-commerce, and have almost all been founders and deeply involved in major companies, and all of them. I'm going to introduce them briefly. Of course, we have Brent Hoberman, founder of lastminute.com and millions of other things. We have Michael Ross, founder of Figleaves and probably millions of other things as well. We have Marc, Charron, who's managing director of Tripadvisor Europe, and Andrew Curran, co-founder and CEO of Wardrobe.com. Now, as you know, probably from the previous panel, we were hoping to kind of kick these things off with very short, none of these boring speeches. Not that you get boring speeches from anybody, but very sort of quick pitches from each of the panel, really saying what they're about at the moment and maybe the most interesting things that they want to share with you, whether it's a surprise they've had of the experience in the economy the last year for them, or maybe looking ahead, the biggest challenge that they think is out there. So I'll get that, and I hope they will be brief, and then we can get into a punchy discussion and lots of Q&A. So Brent, do you want to kick off?
Sure, so super brief. I guess, so from lastminute.com to mydeco.com, tried to take lots of lessons. One thing about lastminute.com is we did, when we were there, we went through the very big downturn after 9/11 and the bubble bursting. So I'm sure lots of us have been through that downturn, so I think lots of lessons we can learn now. I think the key thing that those that held their heads, did come through that pretty well, and I think the same will be true again. The other thing was continuing to innovate in that downturn became, increasingly important. And I think this is a time when being a smaller company is just massively advantageous to being a bigger company, because what we'll find now going to mydeco.com, where we're in the furniture business, where these guys have got, understandably, a lot of other issues. Obviously, furniture sales are down dramatically, no secret. They've got lots of issues to worry about. And therefore, trying risky, innovative things on their websites is not really their number one priority. So it then falls to a startup to be essentially the R&D for these bigger companies. And I've got no sort of pride about that. I think that's a fantastic place to be. It's actually an interesting place to be as well. And what that means is that we can then work on some of the things that we're so often talking about, and we're just trying out. We're flying lots of kites, and some of them will work and many won't. But obviously that is about tools, 3D visualization tools and other tools that customers can use. It's about social networks and trying to create passion centers and opening that up, and how do you open that up to Twitter and Facebook and MySpace and integrate that, yet make the hub on your own site. And then it is about the search, and I won't sort of the vertical search capabilities and digging even deeper than Google goes, hopefully, although obviously maybe Google will talk more about the Bing.com response that we read about in today's papers, of going even deeper into that vertical. So we hope they don't go to this vertical quite yet. Hopefully they'll focus on the Bing ones first.
A little bit of controversy there at the end. What do you think, Michael? What do you think?
So I spent 7 years deep in women's underwear at Figleaves.com, and I've tried to take that experience into other things. So right now,
And he knows all the jokes.
I do.
He's probably going to get them in
First time today. So I co-founded a business called eCommerce recently, which is an e-commerce services business, sort of arms dealer to the e-commerce world. So we power the websites for the likes of House of Fraser and Asda Direct. I'm also a non-exec director of 3 sort of more early stage e-commerce businesses, including Glasses Direct, selling, unsurprisingly, glasses online, and Warehouse Express, which is selling digital cameras and optical equipment, and similarly eye-watering low gross margins, and then Spreadshirt.com, which is a global apparel on demand business. So I see a lot of e-commerce, different categories, different sectors, different geographies. And I guess there are a bunch of themes emerge that are on my mind at the moment. And the first one is about retailers simply getting the basics right. I think there's a lot of fun, new stuff, technology, all sorts of things going on. And I guess for the people in the physical retail world, everyone knows what just being a good retailer is. And I think that a lot of people don't know what being a good online retailer is, and simply delivering good service, good proposition, a good customer experience. I think it's fundamental. And I think technology is a key component of that. 5 years ago, you had to be a technology innovator if you wanted to be a successful online retailer. I think technology is increasingly now a commodity, and I think that's been a huge shift. So focus on the basics, number one. I think the second one is for me, proposition is the new location. So if you're an online retailer, you know, what location is in the physical world, proposition is in the online world. And I think, you know, people having a point of difference. I see this as a theme, particularly in the startups. What the hell do you do to have a reason to exist? And a lot of retailers who've been around for 80, 90 years, haven't, you know, successful businesses haven't needed to kind of re-articulate their reason for existing. But I think online, that's absolutely fundamental. And I think the third thing that surprised me, and the theme of getting the basics right, for those who've heard Man from Dell, you know, you talk about order attribution and understanding all the different touch points of orders. I mean, the fact that the likes of Dell are struggling with that really surprises me, because these are fundamental issues that are going to transform the way people think about online. And I think you'd come back to the basics, you know, cracking those sorts of things, I think are absolutely fundamental for the next sort of 12 to 14, 24 months.
Come back to some of that. Marc.
I'm the one pretender on the panel, not being a founder, so take whatever I say with that grain of salt. I have been in e-commerce online world for about 10 years. Back in '98, I was part of a QXL team, which Brent started, along with Tim Jackson. Like Brent, this is a downturn is not unfamiliar, and what I remember from that time is how much innovation comes from scarcity. And particularly, I remember, apropos, we discovered Google. We discovered PPC advertising when we could no longer, at the time, it was all about locking up distribution with portals and spending CPM advertising, not to mention spending your IPO money on offline advertising. Some did it better than others. And what we found in experimenting with, at the time, Overture and with Google is you could not cut off 10% of your acquisition costs, but reduce it by 90%. And that came out of the fact that we could no longer afford to spend X million with AOL, which was the conventional thinking for .coms at the time. So, you know, likewise, I bring that forward now, and I think about the paradox is that in downturns, the demand is actually that you do more. You do more for your customers. You do more for your partners. So it's the bunker mentality. I don't believe that you can cost cut your way to survival. In fact, the impetus for us at Tripadvisor has been to go into new markets like metasearch and to vacation rentals, as well as launching China, Japan, and in India. And also address this issue of value that we've always had prices on the site, but we focus more on getting the right hotel. Well, the right hotel now is inextricably linked to the price. So we focus a lot on value because that's what people are thinking. So I guess the core belief is that it's becoming cliche now, isn't it? You innovate, you develop, you grab share. So, we're growing at a terrific rate this year as well, and part of it's because we're going into new markets and hopefully grabbing share of the other guys who are actually, preparing themselves for another time. But I think in the internet things move so quickly, you can't afford to kind of hold back for a couple of years and hope that on the other end that market's still there for you.
Andrew.
So I'm Andrew Curran. Contrary to the agenda, I'm not actually the CEO, I'm the COO. It's my wife Sarah who's the CEO of the business. And as a very brief history, it started just the two of us 3 years ago, so we're now moved back to the UK. We all started in France actually, and so now there's 50 odd people in the business over the two sites. And some of the challenges we've had is normal business challenges, I guess, in terms of raising money, recruiting, growing very quickly, all of those sort of challenges which are, I guess, normal to any business, whether it's e-commerce or anything else. But then other challenges more recently, I guess, have been the move to a full ERP system, so it's an end-to-end solution incorporating the website and so on, so making the future proofing of the business fundamental so we can concentrate on growth. So that was one big move for us last year, and always developing that and tweaking it and improving the customer experience, and the architecture of the experience has been very vital to us, certainly. Another recent challenge was the launch of menswear, which went live in January of this year. So that's again learning different shopping habits for men as opposed to women, and understanding that the two are how we get those customers into us in the first place is very different to how we'll attract female customers, and how they shop again is also very different, giving us a whole set of new challenges. And finally, in terms of what we are looking to do now, I guess, in what's our innovation, we're concentrating quite heavily on video. We really fundamentally believe video is interactive video, so not just taking some video content and putting it on, but actually making it interactive and developing tools to do that.
Well, Andrew, you sort of, at least in the e-commerce world, you've revealed yourself as someone who's not been through the past.
I have been through a recession.
I'm sure you have, but in terms of that, from founding mywardrobe.com, have you been surprised by how the last year, I mean, you must have had a million people say to you, January 2009, not a good time to be launching a major new aspect of your business. Has it been easier than you thought?
Well, the response to that for us, and we had, in fact, I don't mind admitting, at the time we had our own board who was saying, hang on, this is not a great idea. But my view, thankfully some around the table shared it, was that by launching menswear, we're mitigating risk because we're doubling our potential audience. So yes, there was an investment in terms of and it was speculative to some extent. But in my view, was we mitigated risk by doubling the size of our potential audience.
Did you? I mean, in terms of that's a sort of logical extension of your business rather than a sort of straight big innovation. I mean, Brent, do you think you say this is an environment in which small companies are best at innovating, but is it as innovative as it should be? Is it as innovative as you might have thought it would be?
I think the bigger frustration we have sitting here in Europe is just generally, is there enough innovation coming out of Europe? And part of that is just because you innovate and then your home market is so much smaller than what you have in America. So one of the most depressing stats I ever saw was just recently that of the 50 most popular sites in Europe, 2 are European. Orange and the BBC. Arguably, you could put, I think arguably some people say you could put Dailymotion in there if you aggregated more traffic. But so that says no, there's not enough innovation coming out of Europe, but there are other reasons for that. And one thing we are doing is we have set up a venture capital fund for founders investing in founders. So that's I've done with Michael Birch, founder of Bebo, and a few others. So that you'll be hopefully hearing more about that as we really get that off.
But I mean, do you think that might be part of the environment that people are still doing things and they're still getting funding for things. They have to be good propositions, and actually the good propositions may be copycat propositions, not, or they may be just tweaks rather than real innovations.
Yeah, I mean, the copycat thing definitely is, there are people who can do very successful copycats, particularly actually in France and Germany, because it takes longer for the American companies to come that way. And those business models, they work very well, but they're still, to me, as an entrepreneur, I think they're kind of disappointing, because you'd love to see companies go the other way, but that's very, very hard. And at lastminute.com, we ended up doing what 90-some% of people do, selling to American companies. Even though I would have argued we had the potential for global innovation, we weren't, but we weren't able to get to the US market.
Marc, what would you say?
So I think, if we come back to, say, core e-commerce, and you look at the top 50, 100 online retailers in the UK, most of them are traditional physical retailers. So if I look forward sort of 4 or 5 years, I see most e-commerce being done by the traditional physical retailers who will simply be delivering a multi-channel proposition. If you say who are going to be the kind of the people who can deliver a sort of a standalone e-commerce business, I think there are going to be few and far between, and I think the ones that are successful, without say mentioning any names, are the ones who are successful will get bought by some of the bricks and mortar players. So we'll see a consolidation. Retail will be multi-channel. I think a lot of the innovation will be potentially, call it the arms dealers, will be the people behind the scenes. So, Brent said being the R&D for the furniture industry, developing tools. I think there's a lot of very interesting innovation, but I wouldn't say it's people necessarily innovating in direct-to-consumer e-commerce. People are innovating in aggregating audience, social retail, tools to help retailers sell more online. So again, I think
that's where the opportunities are, because again, we sort of talk blithely about, the recessions are often the great creators of opportunities.
Depends opportunities for whom. There are lots of retailers. When you talk about how are people finding the current market, some people are doing incredibly well. So again, I'm on boards of businesses that are 100% up year on year, and I'm others that are down 20% year on year. Same is true in the physical retail world. So it's a huge. This is very.
Do they map? Do those variations map the real world, so to speak, or the physical world?
Very much depends on their stage of development, whether they have a point of difference. And again, if you look at the smart physical retailers, one of the things they're observing is, in the online world, you're not constrained by physical space. And so they're actually saying, well, I've got this great brand, I've got these customers, what more can I sell them? So they're actually using online. So, give you an example, Amazon went into selling digital cameras online. Now, when you're Warehouse Express, that's really pretty bad news, that you don't want to be competing against Amazon in any category. So Amazon didn't sell cameras, digital SLRs, 2 years ago. Now it's the biggest digital camera retailer in the world. So there are these pretty seismic shifts going on, and I think, again, and for me, the people who are probably going to emerge in X years' time as the winners are going to be the big, the multi-billion-pound retailers who've got the cash, who've got the footfall, who've got the vision. So I think that's where there's a lot of innovation, I think, yet to be done.
But there is obviously a tension there, because we started off with Brent saying it's easy to innovate if you're small, but the implication of all this is that there are going to be a lot fewer small, or at least the action is not going to be with the small players in the future, because we're getting so much more dominated by the big players. Because that's the way that the industry inevitably develops.
I think a good example of small company innovation, probably the best one, comes out of recent years, is probably Vente Privée in France, which has got a valuation of over €1 billion as far as I can understand it. It just innovated in the model of private sales. There have since been, I think, 6 replicas in the UK and replicas throughout the world, including hugely successful ones in Germany, and now a US copycat actually guilt of a European business. That's interesting for a few things. One is, it's a pity that Vente Privée didn't manage to build a global business out of that. And there are reasons I could go into as to why I think that is. But you've got this disaggregation. But that clearly states that you can be an innovative, new small company and absolutely break through and get massive valuations. The other one that we talked about earlier, the more obvious ones in the UK now, are just the voucher code guys. That is just saying, right, what's damn obvious in a recession? Everybody wants discounts, everybody wants to save money. Everybody here knew that, but there are a few companies who did voucher code businesses who have huge traffic and are up, I think, 400% year on year in terms of traffic growth. So those are small companies breaking through, doing obvious stuff that big companies should have done, but big companies are worried about too much else. I think on the retailing, this traditional high street side, I think actually, Amazon, eBay, those sort of guys are still dominating the e-tail landscape.
And they do a sort of back to basics, or focus on the basics version. I mean, as a consumer, you notice that they deliver a product. They have straightforward ways of dealing with people, which involve not taking the money off the credit card until it's actually been sent, which is not the case with even a lot of the companies that they are selling from. And I think that seems to be that's how they have sustained their position. I mean,
so just the reason why companies like that will be scary, and the reason why Google will be scary going forward, is because they do innovate. So they are the exception. They are large companies that successfully innovate. So Amazon, front cover of, I think, Fortune this week, Bezos just saying how he's still able to innovate. Some articles on Twitter you'll see being pointed to about Bezos just saying, the reason we innovate is because we fail. And that's the big thing, that's the big difference. The big companies, failure is not tolerated. Amazon and Google, you fail, you're still a hero.
Well, Marc, do you think, I know that you've been based here for a long time, but this sort of contrast of just the European ability to sustain these kind of models and push them to the next level versus American, do you think that's going to be an enduring thing?
Certainly faced that head on with QXL, since we were battling eBay and that space. At the time, capital was available we went through the IPO process, so we could actually give it a good run. And whether we succeeded or failure, I think was more about us than whether we were a European-based company or US, to be honest. I do think the culture of failure, I see it more in American companies, genuinely embracing it, not in sort of a business school, yay, failure, but genuinely believing that we're going to take risks, that we're going to succeed only if we fail often. You heard it from Bob Thacker at the beginning. It does seem somehow more culturally intuitive, or at least I see that in the culture. It's certainly ours at Tripadvisor. No one gets their hand slapped or worse if they have a good hypothesis for an idea, and particularly when you're trying to come up with, you're dealing with these unknown spaces like Facebook, and we've had a couple great hits on Facebook. What you don't hear about is all the failures that we have in terms of the applications that we tried. And I loved what Bob was saying about the failures nobody hears about, right? They hear about the successes. So I do think that genuinely embracing it, and not just having something that's said and then seeing a bunch of people fire as they try things. I think the trick is not to bet the bank on any one thing. So when you talk about innovation, it's not about going into R&D mode for a year and say we're going to reinvent the business. It's the great thing about being online is you put it in front of people. You don't pretend to know what people want. You put it out in front of people, and then they tell you whether it works or not. So we have weekly releases. We're constantly testing, because we don't pretend to know, and you don't know, or let me say in a positive way, you get that immediate feedback loop, which makes the space special and so much fun, because it's not about your R&D, it's about launching something and seeing what people tell you, and then fixing all the stuff that you got wrong. Inevitably you do.
Yeah, I think we're going to get some great questions and contributions to this from the audience, assuming that with just a plea that you sort of keep it more or less brief, not your essay on what everything's been said or other things that you want to hear, but I know that we've got a really high quality audience, so I'd love to make use of it. If you can put your hand up and then also wait for someone to come with a mic. Questions, proposals, things to be shot down? I know, I'm almost going to just stare you out, because I know that there are a lot of views. I've seen the list of people here, so this is just nonsense, the fact that you don't have any questions here.
Just a shout.
I can shout. It's Justin at Sky again. I was going to ask, if this theme of innovation, the bright panelists we have here, there's evidence that innovation has come from within. I'm wondering whether that is part of the secret to be genuinely unique in your innovation, or whether actually it's about aggregating insight that should be out there for all, and it's about those people who have that extra sort of confidence, if you like, to turn it into something and make a go of it.
Yeah, Mike, you were saying, we were talking about leadership actually before we came on.
Yeah.
What makes the difference?
I think I would contrast. I see lots of leaders, I would say, from CEOs to people leading teams operating in this. And you can see the people who can set a vision and can then lead a team with them really stand out. And then you have other people who sales are a bit down, they're not meeting budget, and they look like, they look like they're sort of living dead. And clearly that creates a culture within a business. And I've seen this in different geographies with different scales. I think pure leadership, being able to sort of take a group of people with you, is incredibly important. Incredibly important.
Does that get harder in this kind of environment, or is it actually easier because people are holding on to the ship?
It's really, really hard in this environment. I went on a leadership course 10 years ago, and they had this wonderful expression called grip self. And it was all about, when things are tough and stressful, if you can't control your own emotions, you don't have a hope in hell of actually controlling and leading other people. And so the extent to which how people deal with difficult, it's very hard often in these businesses to know where to turn. Do I cut costs? Do I grow revenue? Is it about innovation? Is it frankly about doing the basics better? Post hoc, it's very easy to say, well, they did this and they were successful. But actually, at the time, I can tell you, it's really, really, really hard. And therefore, to be able, and the reality is most people have no idea what the answer is. It's about convincing yourself and then convincing investors, a board, other people, and then taking people with you. And that's almost the sort of more, very, 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 very sort of key part of it.
I mean, Andrew, where have you and your wife found that?
Our experience has been actually, as the team has grown bigger and bigger, it's actually harder to innovate. When we can sit there at our own little board meeting, which might have be at breakfast time, or whatever, and we'll pump out ideas all day long. Because that's the kind of mindset that we're in, and we are innovators.
But Mike's point about who you turn to, it's not even the sort of, you've got the innovation, but when things are tough and you actually don't know which lever you ought to be pressing, where do you feel you were getting? Where did you get the support? Do you feel there is enough?
No, I think you've just got to push, be very persuasive with your idea and stick with it. Not looking behind your shoulder to see what everybody else is doing. Just go out and just deliver your idea. There's usability testing, and I think that is vital. Bob mentioned that earlier on this morning. You've got to test, but once you've tested and you've got your feedback from that test, then leap and go and do it. So an example for us was I think April last year, so April 2008, we launched MyTV in the fashion space that hadn't been done before, where you could buy directly from within a TV video. And that has been incredibly successful, if not necessarily, and tracking the ROI is notoriously difficult anyway, but certainly from a PR point of view and a traffic driver, it's been fantastic. So by all means, you have to innovate to drive traffic, and some more stuff coming out next couple of weeks, again in the video space on mywardrobe.com. And it may not be have an ROI attached to it, but it will definitely drive traffic, and it's less quantifiable, but definitely there.
But then you still have the bean counters asking you to quantify it.
Oh, we do, yeah. But
you have to just face them down.
You just face it down, and at the end of the day, we've got to drive traffic growth. That's the fundamental, is driving traffic growth and improve conversion. Improving conversion for us now. Probably our two key focuses, other than innovation, really, is increasing the traffic and improving the conversion. So that's we've done heaps and heaps of usability testing, starting at the back. So we start at the checkout, which we just released last Saturday, new version of, and then we'll work back towards the homepage effectively. So that's our approach on.
And do you feel, going back to what you were saying earlier, do you feel, being based here, that there's a sort of ceiling on what you might expect to achieve, even
No, I don't agree. I don't agree with that, and I can only speak for the fashion space. But our experience is, and we're in a pretty competitive market in the fashion space with great e-commerce providers like ASOS, like Net-a-Porter, great business. The outlet being a new to market as well. All of these businesses have websites that are actually, in our view, certainly those sites are actually ahead of the game by comparison to some of our US competitors. They're a much more fulfilling experience, a richer experience than some of the US sites, which are reasonably flat in fashion. There's a picture, you can click on it, you can buy it, but there's no real experience attached to that. So I think, certainly in the fashion space, we're innovating ahead of the US.
So I mean, so going back to the question of innovation, to me, it's a lot of it's about mavericks and obsessiveness and how do you get the mavericks at the top of the company. The corporate ladder is structured for consensus and politics, and so to get to the top of those companies, you tend not to be the mavericks. Mavericks also tend to be slightly eccentric, they don't tend to last that long in their companies. That's why Amazon is a great example. Bezos still there. That's why they still continue to innovate. At lastminute.com, we had constant debates about how much innovation to do, particularly as we went into that downturn. And really some quite heated arguments. And to be honest, it was just, I felt the lucky thing in my argument, the easy one, was lastminute.com, the brand ethos was innovation. The two were so inextricably linked that it was quite an easy one to be able to go forward. But even though I was the CEO and co-founder and running it, to get some of my team along some obvious innovations like dynamic packaging, which seems so obvious now, I literally had to buy a company because my UK MD and German MDs refused to do it. So I'm like, okay, I'm buying this company that does dynamic packaging. Now we're doing it. Isn't that great?
But then the message that comes through from this is just you have to be bloody minded. You have to sort of ignore everyone. Do you think people? I mean, I started off by talking about does this space sort of breathe different air? Are you just being willfully optimistic? I mean, I have to say, as someone who does occasionally sit on these panels in more traditional industries, the equivalent discussion would have been a lot more depressing, even though we're seeing all these sort of green shoots and everything else. People talking constantly about the challenges and the risks, and we just have to get through the next year. It's great that none of you are talking like that, but is it all mad? I mean, what maybe each of you, do you think that ignoring, I mean, you may have come through the next year, we may not be talking about sort of a traditional downturn effect, but just that you are all kind of not seeing some of the risks that are out there and that you're not worried enough about what happens to this space with such dominant players like Google, with some of the other risks that are coming down the road. I mean, what do you think are the biggest risks? For 5 years maybe for the e-commerce.
Is it polite to use the word dominant and Google in the same conversation?
It is funny.
I think, one of the big obvious risks, it's interesting, today we're at an e-commerce conference, not an advertising conference. Even online advertising. So the big thing is online advertising and the CPMs we're seeing dramatic falls. I'm also on the board of The Guardian, dramatic falls in, don't say too much, but some of the numbers came out yesterday. The numbers were out yesterday. It's okay. I just reminded that they've publicly come out with some numbers. But obviously, you're seeing not just offline, but also CPMs. Generally, we all know anybody selling advertising on their site is seeing that is under huge pressure. The thing you've got in this business, most of our businesses, are just a flexible enough cost base. So that means we're not blind to it, but you can adjust that cost base very quickly and much more easily. But the benefit we've got is that e-commerce definitely, is a shift, and actually part of this recession is obviously a shift to value. Where the value is, it's the same as what we saw after 9/11 at lastminute.com. Where the value is, it's online. That's where deals are.
So riding the structural wave is actually helped. The recession is almost pushing everyone in your direction, arguably.
Yeah, it would have been. I still say, it would have been better without it. But
but in some areas,
in some areas, I mean, those guys who are really going after deep value are very lucky. But few of us, we can tweak our business models to that, but you can't have the whole thing.
I kind of go back to about 1840 when I think about this, because in 1840...
So when you were born?
That's what I'm As someone who believes that economic history is everything.
Well, it's interesting. Around 1840, I was quite sure, was the first department store in the world was launched in Paris, and the guy who launched it had some quite interesting innovations. One of them was fixed prices. You actually didn't have to haggle. That was quite new and innovative for the time. And the other was self-service, that you could actually wander around and pick up stuff yourself. And actually in Paris in the 1860s, there was about 150 department stores, of which 2 are left today. And I think reflected what you said at the beginning, exactly, it's just really, really early days. We're sort of at this sort of the beginning of the end of phase 1 of e-commerce. And I think if we were sitting here in 5 years, personally, I think what we're seeing is a sort of tectonic shift in sort of retail. And actually, it's still going to look like retail, but actually there are going to be a lot of people that are going to disappear. Woolworths being sort of the Zavvi, the sorts of examples where their whole category has just simply shifted, catalysed by online. And I think we're just going to see that more and more. And there are going to be people who are going to win, and there are going to be people who are going to lose, and the world will go on. And the people who kind of work out where they live in the value chain, there are clearly great opportunities. But it just sort of feels like we're on this thing that's sort of moving around, and actually you just got to pick the right thing to sort of jump onto.
And do you worry about the sort of, when you said people were going to be going into, a lot of the big stuff is being done by the sort of bricks and mortar side of the industry. I mean, do you worry about the sort of
because I've got so many fingers in so many pies. No, I mean, so eCommerce, specifically, we want to be the arms dealer to the multi-channel retail world, because we recognise that actually, if you are trying to, I love the people at the coalface, whether it's my wardrobe or Glasses Direct, who are innovating, creating new retail concepts from scratch, but it ain't easy,
And getting harder, you think getting harder?
Getting different. I wouldn't say it's getting harder. It's
See, nothing is ever bad. I'm trying to get, How long do you have to wait to get a negative remark out of people in this world?
Well, the challenge is when you're pre-profit. There's a joy of being pre-profit. Really.
Not making any money yet.
Let's be really clear for the founders. When you're pre-profit, it's about a vision and a dream, and one day the lines will cross, and they'll be dancing in the streets. The moment you're profitable,
No, you're just a load of happy people.
it's when you get,
it's
it's the P word. Once you hit profit, and suddenly it's about how do we make more profit? Why are we making less profit than we did like that? Then the nightmares begin.
And then your innovation gets dramatically reduced.
Because suddenly it's like, you're making profit, don't do anything
That's the metric.
to compromise. So I think there is a...
And that's what you're saying. So it's the freedom, you have the freedom. When you haven't done anything yet, you can do what you like.
Which is why when Brent was saying that there's an advantage to small businesses, and we work really hard trying to act like a small business. We've gone from 50 to 500 in 3 years. But I wonder if it's because small businesses are more likely to have founders involved. And a founder's thinking is what you're hearing here. It's a distinct culture. Tripadvisor is still run by Steve Kaufer, the founder, and it has an impact on the business in ways obvious and more implied in terms of, I think culture is top down. I mean, great ideas come up, and I believe that, but your culture is set because he's going to hire people who think the way he does, and we're expected to so on and so forth. So a lot of the things you're hearing is a founder's perspective, and I think it's particularly good in this kind of environment. It sustains, and you talk about how do you forge a sense of purpose, and how do you get people, I think Bob talked about it as a resolve. I mean, a lot of that comes from that level of leadership. I've seen it before, we've gone through this before, and this is how we're going to get through it.
Did that sort of ring true, the sort of pre-profit idea? Do you
Absolutely,
feel,
yeah. We're due to go to profit next financial year.
So I didn't want to find a polite way of asking, are you still pre-profit?
No, we've been happily losing money for the last 3 years, but next this year coming up.
So you're still feeling kind of liberated? You don't
Definitely, yeah. But, at least the losses are getting less each year, have been getting less each year, and next year is our first break even, according to the plan. So we've had that freedom, but as long as I think the trend is going in the right direction, you can be left alone to some extent by your board and your investors to carry on and do, as long as you're delivering the original projections that you put together, or preferably exceeding them.
And Mike was saying, we really haven't seen anything yet, we just don't know, and particularly in the sort of structural shift of e-tailing and what it's going to look like in the end. I mean, is that what keeps you up at night, just thinking, shoot, I'm going to turn out to be whatever the middle stage is between dinosaur and
Humans.
well, chimps that never made it, a sort of a dead end on the evolutionary trail to
Yeah, I think we've also had the luxury of starting with nothing and coming up to be a small business now at a sort of 5 million-ish turnover. So it's actually very easy to deliver 200% growth year on year when you're starting from a very small base. It becomes a little bit more problematic when you've got to go from 5 million to 10 and 10 to 20 and 20 to 40 to keep up with the pace of the market. So far, we and many other players in this space have been able to deliver that sort of level of growth. It's about maintaining that now, but the overall size of the market is we haven't scratched the surface yet.
I like the Darwinian allusion there, because this may sound cold-blooded, but I think there's a lot of bad businesses that aren't going to survive this, and they're getting caught out, and they may have had legacy advantages in terms of where their storefront was or a brand they built up years ago, and if they're not running good businesses that are keeping up with the times, they will lose, and hopefully, like a fire in a forest, it allows others to grow.
Do you think, I mean, structurally, is that harder for that to happen in e-tailing or in e-commerce in general, that you would be able to hold on to something without a real competitive advantage? Because obviously, as you say, when you talk about physical location, you can see that happens for hundreds of years. People manage to escape.
These guys, I can only speak as a consumer. I don't think of a lot of e-tailing as being particular. It's very commoditized in many ways, and there aren't that many e-tailers that stick out in my mind in a way that says I must go back there. We talked about Amazon, but that tends to be the exception proving the rule. So it seems to me that there must be other things at work here if very commoditized sites somehow continue to take over. I don't think that happens in a downturn. And people, we heard earlier, people are looking more, they're testing more, not just for price, but the site experience as well. I think that it does catch people out who might be able to rise with the tide, and simply when the tide's not rising, it asks other things from companies that they wouldn't be asked for otherwise.
I want to get into a question about government involvement in this, or anything that they could possibly do which will make you all laugh and say, stay well away. But there is, I think we'll get a few more questions. The one at the back here, if you wait for the mic. You might not be able to shout loud enough.
Hi, Paul Zimmerman from Play.com. The question I've got, really, I think Brent mentioned Vent Privé and whether or not they should have expanded either into other territories in Europe or perhaps elsewhere internationally. And I guess the question to the panel, if you don't want to talk about Vent Privé, perhaps you can talk about MyDeco or others. You can use other folks. But at what point does a company, sort of faced with a quandary of investing in an innovation in an addressable market in which they currently serve, do they then go, let's park that and let's go into Europe? I mean, at what point, do as a founder, do you think that people should be, young companies should be going, actually, you know what, we've done enough innovation now, let's turn to Poland or Germany or France?
My implication, what you said before, was never really, but...
Oh, no,
yeah.
no, I mean, I think I could link it to your last question, actually, which is about government intervention, actually. And, I still have an unformed view that you could link that, actually. And that there are still a lot of barriers to creating European winners, partly because it's still quite hard to get across Europe, partly because there is all the problems we know, those of us who've done it across Europe, whether it's regulation or translation or financial ratings, different financial rules, etc., etc. There are so many barriers you do it. I think, and expanding across geographies to some extent, I think in this market, in the e-commerce and the internet market, it can become a necessity because you've got a fixed cost base, depending on your business, of this technology. It depends how much you invest in it. If you can just buy eCommerce, then great, but if you need to do a lot more yourself, then you may have a bigger fixed base in your home market. You are in this arms race with American companies with their huge home market, so you sort of have to expand. So that was definitely my view at lastminute.com, where we definitely got called Muppets by our esteemed competitors, who I won't name now because I've got over it. It was a long time ago. And for investing sort of £25 million a year in technology while we were in this gracious state of losing lots of money. And one of the ways to do that was to expand across Europe, which we did. But we did it in many geographies by acquiring businesses, and we were just lucky to be in a position to do that. With MyDeco, it's a different business model. What we try to do is make it, without being too boring, just really lightweight, really so that we can expand. We're much more of a lead generation business and a tools business and a social network business. So that said, we should be able to expand that into other geographies. So we are thinking, obviously we have a German investor, so that we'll think at some point, but that's harder. And we'll think about America pretty quickly because we think that what we're doing is not being done yet in America. So we think we can do that, but in a very low-cost way, thanks largely because Google's going to put us at the top of all their pages.
But you must have faced some of that with Figleaves and...
Global underway domination, absolutely. That was the mission. I mean, I think that Two observations. I think the first one is that in every business I'm involved in, people massively underestimate it is the sort of, the founder wants to be able to say, yeah, I can expand, we have the capability, we've got the team. The reality is it's incredibly disruptive to organisation, and often what you're doing is before you've reached a critical mass in your home market, you are really straining an organisation that doesn't have the capability to expand internationally. I think the second one comes back to actually cracking what your point of difference is. You know, if you recognise that you are going to be in a commodity, selling commodity products, then you want to be the lowest cost provider and you want to have scale. And so you find some businesses that have the insight that say if they're going to, say Pixmania for example, if they're going to succeed, they have to have European scale, or Play.com for example. So therefore, you know, absolutely expanding rapidly becomes a strategic imperative. But what you often find, and where things go wrong, is people, they haven't quite worked out what their point of difference is. They say, oh, well, actually, let's just take the same stuff and flog it internationally. And then they fail on two dimensions. They fail it from an execution perspective, and they really fail because they haven't worked out what they're trying to do.
At that moment, I mean, the implication of what you were saying earlier about and it harks back slightly to my government question, is that that's the moment where most of the sort of British or national European ideas either turn to America or they just don't happen. I mean, that's when the Americans have the capacity to do that in a way that we don't, when it talks about going the next level. Is there, I say this because I know the Conservatives, for example, are now talking more than they have done in the past about wanting to be a bit more strategic about which bits of Britain and, you know, which bits of the economy are going to be successful in the future. And of course, they talk about
Video
this
games.
kind of sector, video games, and, you know, well, today's the day of Digital Britain, the government's own contribution to this. But from what you're telling me, it's not the stuff that they talk about to do with, you know, skills and startup, you know, venture capital firms that's really the problem. It's these kind of rules of the road and ways to go from being medium-sized to huge. So what do they do about that? Nothing. I mean, you know, how can they do that?
I think it's never simple, and it's always a combination of all of those things. I think, you know, helping with the infrastructure, great. You know, that has to still be a good thing, which is what is being addressed today at 2:30 or something, isn't it? So that'll be fixed by this afternoon. So that's good. And then, but I do think, yeah, I mean, for me, there is something about this European home market scale issue that there must be ways of helping that acceleration. Because it is really hard, and it is easy to fail
Can't
doing
make
that.
them all speak English, though. I mean, there are structural...
No, well, you could have translation funds. You know, if we're talking about stimulus and all sorts of stuff, why not just stimulus to translate models across Europe, as an example?
Though I always feel that when you're looking for innovation, I don't think who here would look to Brussels to find innovation. Maybe.
They have, well, I mean, the issue is they have lots of funds for innovation. The problem is none of us. I just found some on the web the other day, and I emailed them and got no response.
But that's the point. I mean,
but they exist.
I'm
I mean,
always
they
sceptical about
exist.
these things.
I'm
They
very
talk
skeptical they
about,
exist.
you know, I used to work, one of the things that wasn't mentioned, which wouldn't expect to be mentioned, but I used to work in the US Treasury, and that was the time when sort of Larry Summers, who's now working for Obama, would be sort of fighting off all the bright ideas for helping a digital America and helping get everyone on the information superhighway. And his kind of view, which I think is my view, was, you know, Bill Gates, whoever, sitting in a garage, wasn't writing out forms applying for the latest venture capital trust from whoever, you know, venture capital money from the government-funded innovation. I mean, that just wasn't the way it happens. And I'm always skeptical about those kind of ideas, because as you say, they just sit on forms or they sit on websites and you don't actually get much.
Yeah, I think we can make it easier, and that is something government can do. I think that it is still great to have sources of funding for startups that are, you know, that don't even dilute your equity. And there is another one. There's the Technology Strategy Board. I wonder how many people in this room have even heard of it.
Make the difference, though, do they?
I think culturally they're a positive thing if they're easy enough for people to get to.
Right, another. Got time for maybe one or two more. I mean, with things that you think people have not addressed, do you think this is just too optimistic? Yeah. There you go.
Hi, I'm Josie Adams from Visit London. Just on a slightly more practical note, how much of your time is thought around or is spent thinking around mobile internet and mobile smartphone applications as part of your overall innovation activity? That's a good question.
So I think mobile is clearly pretty irrelevant today for most people, but I think, again, the common wisdom is it's going to, and I think when you say mobile, there's just going to be a proliferation of device sizes, and what will be a mobile, what will be a 5-inch tablet, iTablet whenever they launch it, it's just going to be a whole range of different devices that people will use at different times. A nice quote I heard, won't take any credit for it, in a US conference was someone said that the mobile makes physical retail interactive. And I think some of the really interesting things that will happen will be how physical retail will start using mobile when people walk into a store, that actually some of the things, whether it's personalized prices or whatever it is that online retailers can do easily, actually mobile will enable people to scan a product and say, yeah, special offer for you today. And so that's, I think, quite interesting. I mean, the reality is, I unfortunately spend a lot of time in Waterstones finding books that I want and then buying them there and then from Amazon on my iPhone. So, as a sample of one, it substantially has changed to the detriment of Waterstones, but, certainly has changed my buying behaviour.
I was on mobile. Unfortunately, I was too early. I could have sat here. I think it probably was almost 10 years ago. Preaching, it was 10 years ago. It was preaching how, for lastminute.com, you would get a deal finder. You'd walk out of here and you'd find your deal based on a few people from lastminute.com looking here. You would find your exclusive discounts personalised to you as you went out for the restaurant next door and the theatre, and they'd all be competing for your business and stuff like that. Lastminute.com has, since I left, done an interesting thing. We did that, but we didn't do it well enough, so it was pretty useless, and the devices weren't good enough either. And there was a problem with geospatial location ID across Europe. But I mean, just the standards weren't set. But nowadays, definitely that sort of stuff is coming. And I think the key thing is the pace of innovation in mobile. It's one of the most fun things you can do. Most exciting is just look at these apps and listen to the guys like Shazam, who've now got, I think it's 50 million downloads or something, 10% of all iPhones. Good UK-based company. 200% of all iPhone users are downloading Shazam. So I think there is, but I agree with Mike, it is that online, offline, where we look at that practically from a MyDeca perspective is, I won't say all the ideas, but one of them is obviously is that online, offline bridge, which in furniture, hey, that's pretty exciting. You can now really target that 50+% of people who research their furniture online, but will actually buy it offline.
Mobile? No.
Yeah, I think my view on this is that I've been approached for years for people selling us mobile platforms and so on, and really that's, as far as I understand it, in any event, there isn't a mobile platform as such. The mobile has gone to meet the browser, so there is a browser in all or most phones these days. So there's not really a need to develop e-commerce sites as such. The big win. And the very big win is applications, and that's if we can, as merchants and service providers, develop applications for both BlackBerry and for iPhone and whatever else comes along, that's where the quick wins are.
I don't think you can underestimate what the iPhone did, not just in terms of its penetration, still relatively small, but it seemed to create a new vision across a mass market of what was possible.
Yeah.
And certainly for us, every year, like Brent, QXL did a WAP service back in 2000, spent hugely distracting, great press release though, which was important at the time. Here we are 9 years later, and every year mobile comes up as a conversation. This is the first year we have an iPhone application that we've started, that it seems to be a different world that you're...
But isn't that, it's just because people wouldn't use the mobile phone for other things as long as they just thought of it as a mobile phone, and it's actually taken this, it's really about making people forget about what is a phone and what is not a phone. And I mean, an iPhone, I think, has just stopped being a mobile phone in some level.
Well, that's, I mean, the expression in Japan, we opened a company there, and the phone is not here, it's here, right? I mean, it's a shift from your phone is in front of you this way and used completely different. And there, your searches on Google are actually massive, not 10x more, but 100x. I mean, people are genuinely using their handset as their mobile computer. I don't think we're even close to that here in Europe.
I was picking on that Japan point because I was saying the other stat I read the other day, which if it's rubbish, please tell me, but is that apparently it's on the 85% of ads in Japan have a image tag that you can snap it, take a photograph with your phone, and then it's tagged back, and then you get more information on it. Which is an amazing number.
Well, I think, I don't know, we may have time for one more, or I think we may have to, it depends whether I get told I have to shut everyone up. But yeah, one more.
Hello, it's Malcolm Tucker from shop.com. Do you try and avoid a hippo culture? Highest paid person's opinion.
I'm glad that I wasn't the only one thinking, I don't know what that is. I think because you're always the highest paid person's opinion who we listen to, so no one complains to you about hippo.
No, actually what I did do definitely last month, I was very conscious of saying, look, if I was, because I left a much bigger company, I tried to start lastminute.com within a much bigger company. And so I was very conscious of how do we get that sort of 25-year-old in our company and get their ideas heard. So that was firstly one of my main things at lastminute.com was how do I make sure I can get processes that get this person that can just break through all the layers of bureaucracy that inevitably a company of 2,000 people we will have, so they don't just go off and try and do something somewhere else or just leave in frustration. That's much easier, kind of like my Deca where only 30 people, then that's much easier. You can have very flat structures and that's no skill in that really. But I think it's in the bigger companies where you can, what I really used to start to preach was that we had rules to break the rules. And because there's so many barriers to break, so we would have an innovation track along another side and ways of getting ideas into that track.
Final.
I mean, all I'd add is, I think it's two things for me that break that. One is leadership, is again, it comes back to people who inspire people breaking the rules. And I think the second one, slightly less exciting maybe, but KPIs and key performance indicators, people tracking the right, this is such a data-rich environment, you shouldn't have to have opinions about things. In most cases, the data will, if not tell you the answer, will give you the right direction. And I think one of the challenges in the whole industry is actually people often are measuring the wrong things, measuring too many things, the wrong thing, and actually you have huge amounts of data but lack any true insight into what's actually going on.
Final thought on that is, as founders, we're hardly ever the highest paid people in the organisation.
The last paid.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I think I came into this wondering about what was different about this sector. I'm not sure that I know now, but we have, I think, except for the attitude, I do think that there is clearly an attitude difference. But I guess, some lessons for me, Brent started it off talking about, it's easier to innovate if you're small. I guess the other message from what everyone's been saying is it can be hard to get big in Europe, even if you can be great at innovating. Maybe that's something to think about. We also had can't cost cut your way out of a recession. Proposition is the new location, and not making any money is the most liberating position to be in. So thanks very much for the panel.